I want you to look around. It's okay. Just look up from the screen for a moment and take in your surroundings and ask yourself, are you alone? Really alone? Is it just you where you're watching this? Not just that you're the only person where you are, but you are disconnected from the world around you? Are you isolated in your environment? As we learned some 5 years ago with a certain lockdown, even when you can see the whole world at the tap of a screen, you can still be more isolated than imaginable. Even with people nearby or not, it's always possible to be alone. And that is something you can't always control. So, about video games. When most people think of video games, what is the first game that comes to mind? I'm going to go out on a limb and say that for more than a few of you, that first game was Minecraft. The simple style block game that drops you suddenly into this world with zero instructions where you can do whatever you want. Want to make a house out of solid gold? Sure. Want to raid and pillage nearby villages for all their goods so you don't have to work as hard? More power to ya. Want to sit down and think about the sheer scale and size of the world that you're in and the fact that you're more than likely never going to discover everything this world has to offer? You may be asking, Hearth, what does Minecraft, this lighthearted block game, have to do with isolation as this video title suggests? To which I answer, I know your attention span is short, but patience. Minecraft is a vast sandbox that has been suffused into pop culture as the best-selling video game in history, and is a game played by just about every age demographic. But if you think this game doesn't have some mentally terrifying concepts, then you're just fooling yourself. Just to name a few, Soul Sand has screaming faces in it and can be inferred to be the souls of the damned, Illagers summon demons, and the Endermen are implied to be enslaved by the Ender Dragon. Now, either you never realized this, or you watched MatPat's videos on the subject and you're sad again because you remembered he's gone. Poor guy. Politics finally got him. Minecraft leaves you very much in an after Eden state. You exist in an empty world full of unknowns that likely will kill you multiple times. In its base form, you are alone in Minecraft. This wide-open paradise is home only to you and the villagers, who are generally apathetic to everything you do unless you actively harm one. Oh, and the hundreds of undead, wild animals, and otherworldly abominations that will all try to kill you. This is not terribly dissimilar to other games that handle this feeling of isolation more directly, which we will get to later. Am I looking too deeply at this block game? Maybe. But MatPat did it and got tons of views for it, so why can't I? However, because of all the bright colors in Minecraft and your ability to create anything you want, it feels like you have all the power. And so that isolation is mitigated while you distract yourself by figuring out the math of that castle you're trying to build while the darn sky limit gets in the way. Minecraft is a very peaceful game that lets you get lost in the big wide world every time you load up a new game. Or make a Mr. Beast challenge, or kill your friends, or recreate Never Gonna Give You Up with just music blocks. Really, it's just a giant meme factory when you think about it. All of this has contributed to Minecraft's position as the most widely sold game in history. One I never understood. Yeah, I never understood the appeal of this funny block game. It's fine if I play it with others, but I can never really get into it myself, no matter how many times I try. There just feels like there's no real point to it. I'll build a house, set up a farm, and get a bed, and then... what? Enjoy the peace and quiet? I can do that in real life, only I can actually taste the potatoes I'm eating. You know what I can't do in real life? Die repeatedly. The isolation one feels in Dark Souls is a different sort compared to Minecraft. As if that wasn't the most obvious sentence in the world. Where Minecraft's isolation is generally a peaceful one, Dark Souls' isolation is far from it. Not only do you feel alone in this world, but you feel insignificant compared to the monsters, warriors, and almost literal gods that you are throwing your self-resurrecting body at. You are made to feel like a speck in this world, and while there's others around you, their fates are just as fragile as yours. Except they don't get do-overs. Every one of the people you meet can and probably will die at some point during your playthrough. Onion? Dead. Sunbro? Dead. Patches? Thankfully dead. Andre? never dies because a blacksmith work is never finished. Even as the games go on, this overwhelming sense of loneliness never leaves. As a comparison, despite the heavy and tragic brokenness of Elden Ring's world, it never feels quite so empty as Dark Souls. The three Dark Souls games are honestly desolate. But there's a bit of distinction between a game that emphasizes loneliness and a game that takes place in a dead world. They often overlap, but having a dead world as a setting doesn't preclude loneliness. Despite the traditionally dead nature of a post-apocalyptic setting like Fallout, it's hardly lonely. People still build homes, commit to relationships, and keep on living right there next to you. Life is returning to this dead world. But in Dark Souls, you never really see that. We can surmise from the ruins, the people, and the relics of the centuries past that once people lived there and prospered here. And in Dark Souls 3, these things pile on top of each other, showing that people had risen from one dead world to another. An unceasing cycle. The ratio of those trying to kill you and those who are actually on your side is very lopsided, and oftentimes those lines get blurred to the point that sometimes it's you who they should fear. This hostile world, even though it's not as quiet as Minecraft, still enforces that sensation of seclusion, which in turn makes the reprieves of the Firelink Shrine or Majula so important. In a similar vein to Dark Souls, we have the Metroidvania genre as a whole, which, due to its emphasis on exploration and mapping your own path, is built on establishing a sense of separation. You must chart these courses, as you're the only one here to do so, or the only one willing to. But that does not mean it's always so lonely. Hollow Knight, while a nigh flawless example of a Metroidvania, can easily transition between the danger and fear of the lower parts of Hallownest and the cozy comfort of the town of Dirtmouth up above, or even the smaller refuges where friendly faces can be found. By comparison, Blasphemous is a remarkably twisted world, scarred and stained at nearly every angle, but lonely would not be the words I'd use to describe it. Plenty of time, there are others in this world who will speak with you and ask for help, making the anguish-filled world feel a little softer, if only because you're sharing it with others. But a Metroidvania that does emphasize loneliness and especially the dread of isolation is, well, Metroid Dread. As a general noob to Metroid and having only played Dread, I can only go off this game as an example, but with that said, the air of confinement, paranoia, and confusion that Dread is able to instill within the same time frame it's making you feel like the master bounty hunter that is Samus Aran it's truly horrific. That even when you feel like the most capable person in the galaxy, with just one step into a certain place, even then you can feel so terribly alone. The planet Samus, and by extension the player finds themselves on, is crawling with inhospitable animals, violent parasites, and a lurking presence in the main villain, Ravenbeak. But the horror of this game most especially comes from the Emmys, robotic research drones hacked and repurposed to hunt Samus down whenever she enters their domains. With each Emmy surpassing their predecessor with unique specializations to never let you get comfortable whenever near them. And when compared to the savage monsters, the cold brutality of the Emmys is almost more distressing, and more effective in selling the helpless seclusion of your situation. Because at least the monsters, the parasites, and even Ravenbeak are alive. One could argue in that way you are not alone, but there's nothing else in the Emmy zones while they are operational. Just the cold echoes of them skittering and beeping in the halls. So once you enter their territory, you are the only living thing there. Even in the rare safe spaces where you can converse and touch base with Adam, your sole companion, that too is stripped away at the end of the game, when it's revealed that it was Ravenbeak the entire time, using Adam's voice to manipulate you. This retroactively darkens every interaction you have with Adam since arriving on the planet, establishing even further alarm as you try to pick out the place where Ravenbeak's manipulation adds up. Loneliness doesn't require you to be alone, after all, and the art of sowing distrust is just as effective a method to creating a sense of isolation, making you doubt both yourself and those around you. So even when surrounded by a dozen voices, you still feel the same reclusive isolation. The indie breakout hit that is Slay the Princess is a masterclass in tone and atmosphere, and more often than not, making the player doubt everything. Whether it's the demanding and obfuscating narrator that recites your every action, the myriad of voices that gather inside your head across multiple branching paths, or the titular princess, whose shape and personality shift in response to your actions. All are in a seemingly constant state of flux, to varying degrees. The voices remain relatively the same, but when and where they appear changes. The princess, meanwhile, is a nigh constant, unpredictable figure, and the narrator, the most consistent, rarely hands information beyond the bare minimum, leaving you always doubting his intentions. Within this swirl of uncertainty, it's fitting that Slay the Princess is then truly a love story, as even through the suspicion, unknowing, and not one person involved in this mess being fully themselves until the last minutes of every playthrough, the point of the game is two individuals finding solace and togetherness, even as their messy selves get in the way. In that way, Slay the Princess creates an air of seclusion amongst others, so that real intimacy can be expressed through growth. And just like that, making you feel alone can also create an empowering effect. By setting you against seemingly insurmountable odds and giving you the means to overcome them, games invite the player and characters to step up. Almost every game mentioned up to this point does this in one way or another. In Minecraft, it's as simple as letting you feel empowered by taking care of yourself and creating whatever you want. The Metroidvanias empower you to overcome vast unknowns and incredible enemies, and No Man's Sky empowers you by granting you total freedom in its world. Though a multiplayer game, now, the vastness of the universe you find yourself in means that for the most part, you'll be charting a lonely course through the stars. Cataloging fauna and flora, collecting ships, learning mysteries, mapping the stars, and leaving your fingerprint on the universe. This act of discovery, of imposing importance and meaning on every world, plant, or animal you come across, is something indeed at the heart of mankind. In such a widespread and sparsely populated universe, the explorer's heart inside us can break out, to build and see with nothing truly restraining us. I can find myself drifting along in this game for hours, just appreciating the novelty of me perhaps being the first person to see these sights, and the thrill and power that gives is intoxicating, and it's one born of intended isolation. Perhaps that's why people like Minecraft so much. Maybe I just needed it to be packaged differently. As incredible as it is, exploring these planets and moons is still dangerous, as some places seem determined to wipe you off their surfaces. It is, for obvious reasons, impossible to separate the fear from the triumph, because for something to be empowering, it has to make you feel as though what you accomplished is beyond normal capabilities. And from a practical standpoint, it's easiest to convey that through challenge and danger. And while No Man's Sky manages to excel at selling the wonder and freedom, the danger itself is, while ever present, far from impossible to deal with. Worst comes to worst, you can always just leave the problem behind. Oh. Well, that sucks. Turning a familiar surrounding into one that makes you feel literally and metaphorically minute, while putting you totally alone in a world of familiar monsters is what makes a solo run of Grounded so much more unique than a multiplayer one, in my opinion. You could tackle this with friends, reshaping the experience, but on your own, the traditionally benign backyard of a suburban family becomes one of the hardest and most unsettling to traverse. Though I've yet to play it, I feel that Subnautica has the same air to it. Though personally, I have a greater fear of a situation like Grounded. At least in the setting of Subnautica, I could rely on technology. But here, you're left to rebuild everything for yourself. Create means of survival no one else could think of all by your lonesome. Like I said before, it empowers you, but the restrictions further emphasize your solitude in a world that is completely hostile to you, with you always being limited to the things that you can make from the scraps around you. Grounded never lets you get too comfortable. You must be smart, use what advantages you can, because you never know when something worse is around the corner. This principle is exacerbated in the game Inside, where all the traits I mentioned before are taken to their natural extreme. You are a child, running from everything that you see. Men hunt you, animals attack you, monsters lurk in the waters and darkness, and the most frightening places are the ones teeming with people. The disturbing and washed out imagery of Inside, contrasted to the faded color of your character, singles you out as a rare instance of chaos in what appears to be a forcibly uniform society, one which attempts to control everything, suggested by the robot like people that they mind control. Puppets that you too have to use at several points in order to progress. Since there is no dialogue, no explanation for what you're looking at, you are never fully at ease. Although, even if it was answered, something tells me that wouldn't make it better. The name Inside is rather apt, as while you begin by running through the open forests away from your pursuers, it becomes apparent that you're running into something, inevitably ending up within a massive facility, and thanks to an unhealthy encounter within a city, we've been conditioned not to wind up alone in populated places. And not once can you be labeled as being anything except isolated. The puppets aren't people. The actual people attack you on sight, and I don't even want to know what these things are. You have to work around every problem because you're never strong enough to push past them on your own. Until the end. Spoilers for the ending of Inside, of course. Inside the last facility, you finally end up in a space where you aren't being attacked. Instead, every person's eyes are locked on something, just out of reach. A massive blob of flesh, hung in fluid and being made a spectacle for everyone present. This is the thing that we've been running towards, whether you knew it or not. At least that's all I can assume, since the boy seems to know exactly what to do once he approaches it. He swims out, he touches it, and is finally no longer alone. Merged into this blob of flesh, the weakness of the rest of the game fades as you begin to rampage backwards through the facility. The adults that once seemed insurmountable become bowling pins that you topple over, leaving them running in terror or frozen, staring at what you've become. But even then, the tragedy isn't over. Despite the overwhelming power trip this moment lets you have, when the final moments come and the blob rolls out to look over the sea, that feeling of loneliness creeps back in. Finally free, finally powerful, finally part of something bigger, and yet still hopelessly alone. It's easy to get swallowed up in the pursuit of community, of purpose, even to the point of shaving away parts of yourself to get there. Because what does it matter who you are when you're alone? It's a hard question to tackle when you yearn for connection, where to draw the line and how to reconcile it, especially since no matter how alone you may be, it's yourself that you must always exist with. It's a core theme to the game Celeste, where as the protagonist Madeline scales the titular Mount Celeste, she is hampered by a shadowy inner self, a reflection of Madeline's own self deemed unseemly, the dark thoughts repressed and kept within, thoughts about others and herself. But despite the obvious antagonism, the story doesn't take the simple route of Madeline, the fandom nickname for her, being cut out and denied by Madeline. When that's tried, it backfires, because cutting out a part of who you really are isn't pretty, even if it's a part you don't like. Most of the game is spent alone or with Madeline, a clever way to turn what is still a very isolated journey into a story about two people coming to terms, even if they're two halves of a whole. Depicting the feeling of being alone and cut off, as I hope I've portrayed, can force both the player and the character to reflect. Few of us will likely find ourselves in these extreme examples, but I think most of us can relate to one or more of the kinds of isolation shown. And just like in these stories, lessons can be gleaned for those who, when there is no one else to talk to, are able to have an honest look at themselves. In extremes we learn, and as we all learned some 5 years ago, in the extremes of loneliness you are forced to determine who you are independent of other people. When the community breaks down and all that remains is the self, what do we become? Do we embrace all of ourselves, even the bad, in a vain attempt to seize control? Do we reject the idea of community and endeavor to spend life alone, to refuse another shake-up to your life? Do we take the opportunity to learn how to be self-sufficient, developing into a more independent person? Do we reconcile the good and the bad within ourselves to maybe find a way to change for the better? Or will we only let ourselves wallow in the dark where we've been left? In the end, I've felt that feeling too. Feeling cut off from a sense of community, a sense of togetherness with people in real life. I know we all love our internet hangouts, but realistically, it's not the same as being with real flesh and blood people. But, as these stories have shown, there are a lot of ways to answer the questions you ask yourself when you're all alone. And though I often still feel that way, I often can't say I found my way out of that isolation. It's good to know that, at least in feeling that emotion, I'm not really alone. Thank you, as always, for watching. If you'd like to support me and the channel, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. All of it does a bunch, more than you know. Speaking of, a huge shout out to my patrons and channel members, whose personal and direct support inspires me to keep on going with the gamble that is YouTube. If you'd like to support, it's just $3 a month for either, and you gain access to a private Discord server to hang out and chat, as well as early access content. Patrons get access to the tour guide videos early, and members get access to videos like this one earlier than the patrons do, although they'll also get access to them as time goes on. So, depending on what you want to see, feel free to support, but don't feel too pressured. It's all optional. So, as always, I have been the Hearth Guy, and I will see you all next time around the hearth.